So I think it's time to start the discussion. We have something like 20, 25 minutes before the Prince come at 12:10. Maybe when starting the discussion, when we have the movie I wanted to present. Yeah. Okay. So this is, yes, we have it now. Thank you very much. So this is 2,200 meters in front of the French Riviera, somewhere, I would say, but it's very common. So you will, any large town you will have in the Mediterranean Sea with a canyon in front. This is exactly how the bottom is. And this is my take-home message. This is real. It's not something like fake news. It's a real situation. It's very common in front of each large town. So just to show, how important it is. So thanks to the people that are trying to solve this kind of problem and all problems related to human health, I think it's quite important. So the discussion now is now open. If you have some comments, question, please, to one of the panelists. And yeah. Yes, please. Please. Okay.
Hi. It works. Hi. Many thanks for your presentation. I think very useful and alarming. I was just wondering about what has been said by Maria Babiano and Bella Galil about what's the link it's made between your research and the possible consequences and the actual consequences on human health with the healthcare community, and how do you deal with preventing programs, cure programs, in order to transfer your knowledge to the healthcare community and to deal with this situation.
Okay, so maybe you can.
No, go ahead.
At the University of Algarve, we're having a link between the health community. We have been working in the hospital for the newborn babies. And it's alarming, I must say. We have someone working on the contaminants on mothers and newborn babies. And there's the transfer. So, and link that with smoking, eating, and then the environmental contaminants in the area. Is a pilot project. There's some publications already, but and also there was some courses before, explaining to the medical people what the problems are, because they are not aware about what's going on. So. And they are very receptive in order to understand that some diseases might be linked to these important aspects.
Concerning the health hazards coming from invasive species, I've been working with medical doctors in ERs and especially in pediatric ERs in coastal hospitals in Israel. I've been working in the international arena with the IPBS, the UN great international conglomeration of scientists, and talking about the damages of the impacts of marine invasive species, not only to fisheries and to physical and ecological and economical things, but also into health hazards to humans. And this wasn't a part of the original one. This was introduced on the way. And we have to remember that that the Mediterranean is not only importing invasive alien species, but also exporting it. And 10 years back, there was a study with the United States, and we found out that in ballast water, the Mediterranean is a net exporter of Vibrio cholera into the eastern United States. So we have to think that not only what we receive, but also what we export, and be very careful about it. So there are works done all around. That's okay.
Other question, please? Yes, please. Yeah.
Maybe I can speak loudly. I have a question to Paolo Mircuri about the neutral carbon flight. What is your opinion about carbon tax? Do you think that there is any
I'm generally against tax. And I think tax do not solve these kind of problems. I think that imposing a tax on the passenger or a tax on an airline for the emissions is not the right approach. I think it's more about the pressure from the consumer. Today, most of the airlines do not offer an all-inclusive carbon-neutral product. Some airlines, you can offset your tax on a per seat basis. You can buy a ticket and say, okay, I pay extra, and I offset my carbon offset. What we believe is the right approach is that it should be made without the passenger have to pay an additional tax on a per seat basis. What I mean is that the airline itself should be taken care of the problem, should offset their emissions, and the price will be distributed amongst the 4.4 billion users, but it's included in the price. It's not an additional tax. So today you pay, let's say, 200 euros to fly from Lisbon to Barcelona, for instance. Most of if the responsibility is spread amongst the industry, you'll be paying maybe more 1 or 2 euros, and what you get back is you are free from the plastic, and you are free and you are neutralizing the carbon emissions. This is the approach that I defend. So when you buy the ticket, the industry is already carbon neutral overall, and not on per company or on the per seat basis. And governments imposing taxes on airlines is not the right strategy in our opinion. They should do it the per se and not being taxed and continue to produce. It's like paying for your sin, kind of. That's not the right approach. It's better to really offset and force the airlines through the consumer. That's why campaigns that increase the awareness of the problem are important. The consumer will select the airlines that are carbon neutral, and once 20%, 25% of the airlines are doing this, and consumer have choice, then the remaining 60% will be forced to follow the same standard or run out of business. That's a more business approach, but that's how I see it. If you do on a small scale, yes, but if you do on a large scale, no. The studies show that if it is done across the industry, the cost will not be enormous. Actually, will be a few euros per passenger.
Mr. Rapuri, I was wondering if you could give us concrete examples of actions on the ground that will help, or maybe that Halfly is already has already chosen to become carbon neutral next year.
So there are different methods that you need to apply to become carbon neutral. The first one is improve your technology, and improving your technology is operating more recent aircraft, more efficient aircraft. In the example that I gave, modern aircraft can be 25% more efficient than the older generation aircraft on a per seat basis. Second, you need to adjust your operational procedures. For example, most people think that if we fly from Lisbon to London, we would fly direct. It's not the case, unfortunately. The aircraft follow like roads, so the flights are not direct, and these generate waste, these generate more carbon emissions than what is necessary. So by changing and updating the air navigation system, and by including additional equipment on the aircraft that are becoming available as now, your flights in the near future will become direct flights and not through corridors. And the third one is about adjusting the technology to the existing aircraft. It's impossible for airlines to say, okay, my aircraft now is 10-year-old, I'm going to get it out of my fleet. This will be extremely expensive. But through applying certain devices to the wing, and our foundation is sponsoring an aeronautical research in this respect that will be announced in a couple of months, but we are not the only ones, but applies devices to the wing that improves the efficiency of the wing and reduce the drag, and can generate another cut on carbon emissions by up to 10%. That's a lot. Another example of an operational procedure is, for example, when you go out of your stand until you reach the runway to take off. In certain airports, this can be 10, 15, 20 minutes. In Heathrow or in JFK, in the States, or Chicago, can be as much as 40 minutes. So you don't need to have your engines running for all these periods. You can taxi to the runway applying an electrical device and keep the engines off, because these type of jet engines do not run a warm-up period like the piston engines, like in our cars. Jet engines do not have a warm-up period. So by that you can have another cut in your emissions. Can be 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes of less carbon emissions. Or if those devices are not available, you can use one engine taxi. For example, we are applying now procedures on you taxi to the runway using only one engine, and only when you are close to the runway you ignite the second engine, do the test and go. Of course, all these can do significant reduction in the carbon emissions, but not to zero. So fossil fuels will not last forever. So aviation will eventually evolve into electrical engines or other forms of less polluting energy. But for this, the industry needs to continue profitable, so investigation and research can happen. Until we have zero carbon engines, we will continue to pollute in the last degree if we apply all these. So what is remaining, the only way is to go through carbon offsets. Maybe for the next, I believe, 20, 30 years, we still need the carbon offsets in a big way. And the best approach for me is to link the carbon offset programs, not by paying taxes, but using that money to support programs that sequestrate carbon. And the oceans are in big need of increasing the reserves. And by doing this kind of regeneration programs, you can sequestrate carbon at the same time that you regenerate the oceans.
I think that improving technology is quite important. In the case of plastic, for instance, there was a paper published 2 months ago in Nature, and they were proposing to have new type of plastic. Normally, you use polymers and you branch them, and the way to branch the plastic was the use of a very different type of molecule that you can recycle by putting the plastic in a strong acid, for instance. And then it means you can recycle for 1,000 times the same polymer, and then it could be, really solving the problem of recycling and then the problem of plastic pollution. So improvement of technology is probably the best way, I think, and this is our future. Yeah. There was one question, please. Yeah.
Thank you. I would like to congratulate and thank the presenter of this morning for the high-quality presentation that were given, and ask Mr. President of Hi-Fly a single question about cutting the single-use plastic and why replacing them by another single-use item. Why not using things that can be multi-use, that may include plastic as well?
I don't want to monopolize all the time of the questions, so I will try to be very brief. You are absolutely right. I think that the private sector and the businesses needs to interact more with the science and find solutions for the problem. And you are absolutely right. Reusing more is part of the solution, or just eliminate it. Why do you need plastic around the pillows or around the headsets on an aircraft? Why do you need to give one bottle of plastic, a bottle of plastic with water to each passenger even before you board. Why don't you serve it in another material, especially knowing that 60-70% of that bottles are not used in the flight even. So there are many solutions by substituting the plastic by other materials biodegradable. Just eliminating them or reusing are 3 ways of reducing the waste and reducing the single-use plastic.
Sorry, my question, maybe I miss, for example, for the cutlery, why changing plastic cutlery into wooden? Why not using forks and knives and cups that can be washed?
Yes, it's. I tell you the reason. It could be a nice approach, but on everything that is on an aircraft, we need to weigh the full carbon footprint, right? It's not just the end of life issue. So if you put heavier materials, even if they are reusable, we need to take in consideration that the aircraft will fly heavier and will consume more fuel and will produce more carbon. We also need to analyze the carbon footprint of the materials that we use. So the problem is a bit more complex than what might seem at the first glance. But yes, using reusable cutlery is certainly a solution, but we need to measure in detail the full carbon footprint of that metal cutlery.
Yes, so it's question curiosity. So you were saying that you count for every single footprint on carbon on each flight, I guess. My question or curiosity was about food, because you were saying that you have more or less 46 million people traveling via Ireland, and that accounts for a lot of food production. Do you go to the sustainable sources? Do you count that also in your carbon footprint? Because we all know that also it's a main source of pollution. So
yes, carbon waste, food waste, and cabin waste is very important. And the number of passengers is actually a lot higher than what you just mentioned. It's 4.4 billion passengers every year. First of all, once a flight is done, 60% of the food that was coming into the aircraft is waste. People don't even consume to start with. So we need to implement policies, but this needs to come also from the general public. Why do you need to eat on a 2-hour aircraft? It's just to pass time. Maybe better use your iPads or iPhones. So we need to reduce waste during the aircraft, especially because most of this food is not even used and goes direct from the catering company through the aircraft into waste, and part of it will end up in the ocean. But to answer direct to your question, waste management systems of everything that is put on an aircraft or used by the aviation industry is a challenge that needs to be tackled and solved. And there are different programs underway. We are far from being fully efficient. There are a lot of things that can be improved, but we need to implement better processing and better waste management systems in the airline industry.
Side of after the flight, what happened after the flight, but before, when you prepare all your food, do you count what you buy your food for each flight? Do you count that also on your carbon footprint? Because producing that food also counts.
Absolutely. There are some good examples, for example, from some airlines that are cutting meals with meat. We all know that cattle industry is responsible for 16% of the emissions into the atmosphere. So reducing a bit the meat consumption on the catering is just an example amongst many others how we can decrease the final carbon footprint of a flight, not only the fuel, but at other levels, including the catering.
Okay, thank you. So you noted, I mean, how it's important to merge the ideas from private sector and science, and it's really a topic we have to, reinforce our interest and the action on that. So maybe we come back to the ocean direct, really in the water, I would say. Any question on that, please? Yes, please.
I have a question about the emerging pollutants. And
Yes.
we know that the pharmaceutical industry is very large, and they're always being, the compounds are always being changed, and they are also metabolized and they degrade. So how do you go about, you mentioned that you have now some priority emerging pollutants, but how do you go about addressing the question of what we will have in 1 year, 2 years, because it may not be the same emerging pollutants, and also how do you go about treating them in treatment sewage plants that I bet it's very expensive to go and treat them?
Okay. Thank you for your question. These new persistent pollutants, they have been detected because chemical analyses have improved. So probably if they improve even better, you probably try to identify things that, for instance, were unable to be identified 10 years ago. But also because the medical industry is changing. So the ones that are screening now, you can have more than 50 pharmaceutical screens in the water or in the organisms, is because we are able to detect it properly. This is one of the questions. So if changing, we can probably detect them also. We need to know, relate that to what's being used by the pharmaceutical industry and by doctors. So that's the key questions. But we also can detect drugs, cocaine or whatever. So we have a sort of mixtures in the ocean. I can tell you that if you go Friday here around Portugal, where students party on Thursday, we can detect quite interesting things in the ocean. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen in 10 years' time in the pharmaceutical industry, but that's the probably change. But we probably, if you don't, the treatment, I can tell you that Sweden had a new plant with a new technology in Stockholm. So people are waiting to see their results. They're probably expensive, but it's probably the way you have to go. Because otherwise we have the cholera problem, we have the first wastewater industry, then the nutrients, we get rid of them. But now I have to get rid of the plastic, of the pharmaceuticals, of the personal care products, and whatever. So the things is piling up. And the mixtures in the ocean are very, very complicated and are affecting the food production of the ocean, which we have to increase to feed the huge amount of population. And now if you're decreasing the cow, we're going to go for more fishing industry and that fishing production, and we have to increase a lot. And aquaculture have to be also without antibiotics. Probably can see a very interesting map in the future in the new report on World Ocean Assessment about the map of the antibiotics in the ocean, which is alarming. So we hope that this new technology improves and other countries could at least follow.
João, muito obrigada. João.
Yeah, I do have. Sorry, I have a question to you. I have a question to you. So you were talking about new emergent contaminants, but some of them were, crafted to help. There are medicines and so on. So there is a real question about if they are good for human, because how they can be bad for marine organisms. For some of them, I understand cocaine is not bad, is bad for, but for some of the medicine they could be bad for. You know?
Well, some of them could be okay, but there are these mixture problems. So that's we have to now we have to assess the effect of the mixtures. So people are analyzing bit by bit, but now we have to have nice data sets to analyze what's going on really, but because the effects we know them already, but the effects of the mixture is going to be very complicated.
So, you have time for some other questions? No. Okay.
João,
So
can I
ask
João only one question? Is it dangerous for us to go to the beach?
I don't think so, but I always joking, if you need ibuprofen, you can have 10 muscles and you're okay. So, but it's slightly a joke, but it's not dangerous, no. But you have to take measures to improve the quality. You have the problem of the sediments, the water, and so we need to take measures.
Okay, so I think it's time to close the session. So I would like to thank you for your participation, attendance, and so now we switch to...
Yes, let's thank them all.